Good morning, everyone. 11 o'clock on the East Coast, 8 a.m. on the West Coast. A little technical difficulty to get the podcast going, but I am Vasu VParty. This is the VPartySports Podcast for this Saturday, October 29th, 2 days away from Halloween. Had a lot of tricks already. If you're the Houston Astros, you've already had a trick played on you at home. 5-0 up, blowing that lead. Ended up losing in 10 innings, 6-5. The Phillies with a 1-0 series lead. We'll preview that. A ton of NCAA football today, NBA basketball as well. A few games to go over today and a couple of hockey games maybe we'll talk about at the end. We're sponsored by the Brit Sports Pub and Patio in downtown San Jose. Mention the podcast on Sundays. Come down and watch our show live. We'll be there the next 5 Sundays. Mention the podcast and receive 10% off your entire bill during the NFL Sunday Ticket Sundays. We'll be there for the next 5 weeks, but any Sunday you go in, mention the podcast, you'll receive 10% off your bill. Staff is great. Jasper, the owner, terrific. If you know the downtown area, you live in the Bay Area, come on down and see us. We're about a mile into downtown from the arena in downtown San Jose. All right, so 10% off. You can't beat it. The NFL Sunday Ticket. Lots of NFL to go over. We'll do that tomorrow from 9:30 to 10:30 Pacific time, 12:30 on the East Coast for both the morning and afternoon game. Morning for me. Morning and afternoon games for me on the West Coast. All right, let's talk about the World Series. How about that? The Philadelphia Phillies, the never say die fighting Phils, barely made it into the wild card, barely made it past St. Louis, dominated Atlanta, dominated San Diego, and here they are with a 1-0 series lead after a 6-5 win over the Houston Astros in Game 1. Took 10 innings. They were down 5-0 early after my click to pick to pick. 2 home runs by Kyle Tucker. Thanks to Marty Lurie and Dave Sims yesterday for coming on to preview the World Series with me. And I mentioned with both of them that I thought my pick to click would be Kyle Tucker. And sure enough, he came through. A 3-run home run, a solo home run. 4 of the 5 runs scored by the Astros. Put them up 5-0. Justin Verlander was perfect for 3 innings. 9 up and 9 down. But that 4th inning got to him. In the 3-run 4th, he gave up a single to Castellanos after a couple of minutes reached, as I'm looking at the plays here. The first hit of the game was Rhys Hoskins with a single. After Schwarber had flied out, Hoskins single, Real Muto lined out to Verlander. They had a runner at second. Harper singled, Hoskins to third. With 2 outs, a little bit of miffing there on the Phillies bench because with 2 outs, Hoskins could only get to third on the Harper single. And then Castellanos with a big hit, down 5-0. They needed that run to be scored. So 5-1 at that point, and then it kept the inning going for Alec Boehm. Alec Boehm hit a double down the line, scored 2 runs, made it 5-3, and then you didn't know what was going to happen with Verlander at that point. But it did for the Phillies. What that did when it got to 5-3, they were able to keep Aaron Nola in the game, not have to go to the bullpen early. It was a very interesting scenario. Verlander ended up going 5 innings, giving up 5 runs because JT Real Muto in the 5th inning tied it up with that booming double into left center field after the first couple of guys had gotten on a wild pitch. Was in there as well, too. But Real Muto doubled in both runs. Actually, no wild pitch there, but Real Muto doubled in both runs to tie the game at 5. It was scoreless. The bullpens came in. Abreu, Neris, the former Philly, by the way, Rafael Montero, Ryan Presley, and then Luis Garcia in the 10th inning is the one that gave it up to Real Muto. But how about the Phillies bullpen? Maligned much through the year, the Phillies bullpen. Nola goes 4 1/3. He got pulled right before Alvarez came in. It was 5-5 at that point. Alvarado, with his 100-mile-an-hour cutter, throws an inning. Zach Eflin comes in, throws an inning and a third, gives up a hit and a walk. Ranger Suarez, who was supposed to be scheduled for Game 3 to start, he may be pushed back to Game 4. We'll talk about that as we get closer to Game 3. Syndergaard could be in play for Game 3 or Suarez back for Game 3 and then Syndergaard for Game 4. And then Sir Anthony Dominguez, he's been lights out all year since they revamped the bullpen, made him the closer. An inning and 2/3. He gave up a hit, a 2-out hit, but was able to get out of the inning. And then David Robertson came in and shut the door. A maligned David Robertson by me yesterday. David Robertson came in, 1 hit, 1 walk, had 2 on. Still got the save, but had 2 strikeouts as well, too. So perfect night for the Phillies. They didn't get off to that way, 5-0 down with the Tucker home runs, able to storm back. They have a lot of fight in them, and that's why they are the Fighting Phils. Tied up at 5, 6-5 the final score. Did you see the show? Did you see the World Series yesterday? Great game. The cutaways to the Philadelphia Sports Bar where all the fans were, unbelievable. The passion that the Philadelphia sports fans have. Let's say passion for right now. But anyway, the passion the Philadelphia sports fans have right now. So 5-0 down. They come back to win 6-5. Game 2 tonight will be Framber Valdez versus Zach Wheeler. Zach Wheeler got an extra day's worth of rest. Valdez, it was at 134 last night, but he's minus 138. Zach Wheeler getting the extra day's rest. Beat the Padres twice during the LCS. He comes in tonight as an underdog, 128 underdog, depending on where you see it. The total is 7 under, minus 15. Phillies up 1-0 series lead. I'm going to give you a free pick right now. I'll give you a couple of college picks too before we get moving on to the previews of NCAA football. But that's my pick tonight. I cannot see the Houston Astros losing 2 games at home. The best team in the American League. The best team in the American League will have a better time tonight. Justin Verlander had some injuries during the middle of the year. I think the 8 days off before the Seattle series hurt him a little bit. He pitched well against the Yankees on normal rest, but again, now he had 7 days off basically coming into this series. He was great for 3 innings. The 4th inning, they got to him. The Phillies got to him with that 3 runs, and then they tied it up in the 5th, and he was only able to last 5 innings for the Astros. Their bullpen was outstanding. Philadelphia's bullpen was outstanding too. I want to thank everybody on Facebook and YouTube Live. We're also on Twitter Live. You can reach me at VPartySports on Twitter, VPartySports on Instagram, and then look me up on Vasu Vadaparty on Facebook and YouTube as well. All right, when we come back, we'll take a break. When we come back in 30 seconds, we'll get to the NCAA football, about 45 minutes away from kickoff for the early games of the NCAA. I'll give you a free preview of the games that I like for the noon window, 9 a.m. Pacific time window. But back in 30 seconds with the NCAA football and some NBA, possibly some NHL as well too, on this Saturday edition of the VPartySports Podcast, brought to you by the Brit Sports Pub and Patio in downtown San Jose. Welcome back to the V-Party Sports Podcast for this Saturday morning, 11:15, 11:10 on the East Coast, 8:10 in the morning on the West Coast. I'm Vasu Vadaparty. We're sponsored by the Brit Sports Pub and Patio in downtown San Jose. Check out the Brit Sports Pub and Patio for all your NCAA, NFL action this weekend. They have all the games available to you. They have all the NBA, all the NHL as well. Tomorrow, I will be there doing a live show from 9:30 a.m. Pacific to 10:30. We'll have the sound on during the pregame show, and then when the games start at 10 o'clock, the sound will be off, and we'll continue online to go through the afternoon games and all the NBA and MLB, NHL, all the sports that are going on besides an NFL Week 8. By the way, did you see the Week 8 of Tampa Bay and Baltimore? Oh, boy. A lot of things going on in Tampa Bay. We'll talk about that tomorrow as well. We just got done with the World Series. The Philadelphia Phillies have a 1-0 series lead after their big comeback, down 5-0. JT Realmuto, the hero, the 2-run double in the 5th inning, the game-winning home run in the 10th inning. By the way, did you know that JT Realmuto, the first catcher since 1975 to hit a game-winning home run in the World Series? Now, it wasn't a walk-off, but it was a game-winning home run. Those of you that are old enough to remember 1975, do you remember Carlton Fisk? Do you remember Pudge waving fair at Fenway Park in 1975? One of the greatest games ever, as the Red Sox defeated the Reds in extra innings on that Carlton Fisk home run. So JT Realmuto in some hardy company with Carlton Fisk for game-winning home runs to end a World Series game, but to win a World Series game. Game 2 tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern, Framber Valdez, a 138 favorite, 7 under, minus 115 against Zach Wheeler, who got an extra day's rest, dominant against the Padres in the LCS, pitched well against the St. Louis Cardinals in the wild card series as well. All right, before we get to the NCAA football, I know a lot of you are waiting to hear that. We're less than an hour away from kickoff for NCAA football, so I'm going to give you a couple of early picks right now that I have for the noon window, and then we'll get to the previews of the afternoon games as well. So best bets for Saturday, part one. How can you go against the Ohio State Buckeyes? I know they're at Penn State, and they're more than a 2-touchdown favorite. Penn State came off a big win against Minnesota, got hammered against Michigan 2 weeks ago. They're at home. I know it's not a night game, so they won't have a whiteout, but you got to think the Buckeyes, who I think are the number one team in the nation. I know a lot of Georgia people are going to get on me for that. Georgia's defense is terrific. They're only allowing 9.8 points a game, but I still think Ohio State, maybe 1A, and Georgia maybe 1A. I don't know. If the two teams played right now, I'd have to lean toward Ohio State and that offense. And their defense is playing well. They're only allowing 15 points a game, but they're averaging in the mid-40s and closer to 50 at that point as well, too. So Ohio State on the road, minus 15.5, a lot to lay. But I just haven't seen anybody. Beat Ohio State up yet. There was only one game that they were even close with, but you got to think that Ohio State's going to go in there and run that offense over Penn State and their defense. Sean Clifford struggled the last 2 weeks, but they got to go in the second half against Minnesota. But Ohio State minus 15.5. A little bit of a surprise for me too. Not a lot of games at the noon window. There's a few games going on in the noon window that are pretty good, but just too hard to handicap right now. Syracuse, they are 6-1, and they did come off some big wins in the last few weeks. They did shut down North Carolina State a few weeks ago, but Devin Leary, their quarterback, was out. We saw North Carolina State on Thursday night. They have a tough time moving the ball without Devin Leary, their quarterback. They did beat up on Wagner. They won a close game against Virginia, has a pretty good team, and then Purdue has a pretty good defense. And then Purdue has a pretty good team. They came back and won last second 32-29, and then they shut out Louisville and Syracuse. They lost to Clemson last week. Their only loss of the year on the road at Clemson, a 14.5-point underdog. They were up for a lot of that game, and Clemson came back and ended up winning 27-21. Now Notre Dame has come off. They started off 0-2. We know that they started off 0-2. They lost to Ohio State, played Ohio State very tough. That's a close game that I was thinking about. Then they lost to Marshall. They started off 0-2. They barely got by Cal. They ended up winning at North Carolina, who's got a pretty good offense. Defensively, North Carolina is pretty shabby, but Notre Dame put 45 up there. They lost to BYU at home. 28-20. They beat BYU at home, and then they lost to Stanford 16-14 2 weeks ago, but then UNLV came in, and they demolished UNLV. They didn't cover the 28.5, though. They only won by 23. They've got a good running game. Their defense is pretty good. I think Marcus Freeman has them going. Syracuse has played close games. That's why the line is only at 1.5. I'm going to go with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They're going to run the ball. Defense is pretty good. They'll be able to stop the Syracuse offense even up in the Carrier Dome. Notre Dame plus 1.5. So those are your early bets for Saturday's NCAA football action. All right, let's get to the rest of the NCAA as we get to it. We have a few games to go with. The second part of the window is the one that I'm looking at. The Florida and Georgia play this afternoon in Jacksonville. Everybody that knows anything about the SEC and that rivalry, that's a rivalry that should not be played at either home park because somebody will die there if they do that. That's a little stretch. But Georgia, Florida, number one Georgia going up against Florida. They're a 22.5-point favorite, 23.5 in some cases. But Georgia's very good defensively. They've only allowed 9 points. Florida's offense is hit and miss, but this is a rivalry game, and this is a big rivalry game. That's why they move it to Jacksonville. They've been tailgating there in Jacksonville for 2 days. It's an annual event down there in the Southeast. Having lived in the Southeast for a little time period, I know the impact of Georgia and Florida. Florida's had a tough start to the year. They played with Alabama. They played pretty close with Alabama and Tennessee. Georgia, however, is a different animal. They are number one for a reason. Like I said, Ohio State I still think is number one, but Georgia's defense is nothing to sneeze at, and they're right there. Oklahoma State at Kansas State. Something has happened to Oklahoma State the last few weeks. They did get a win at Texas. Somebody still has to tell me how Oklahoma State was a 7-point underdog to Texas at home. This is the number 9 team in the country. You watch that game, you see the defense for Oklahoma State. It's not very good. They give up a lot of points. Adrian Martinez, the transfer from Nebraska, he goes to Kansas State. They've got some wins under their belt here as I look at the records. 5-2 for Kansas State. Oklahoma State 6-1. This is a big game in the Big 12 as I look at the standings here. Oklahoma State 3-1. They're a game back of TCU. They lost to TCU a few weeks ago. And then Kansas State also at 3-1. In conference play, Kansas State's defense has allowed nearly 26 points a game, whereas Oklahoma State in 4 games, conference games, has allowed 133 points. So that's nearly 35 points a game in that scenario. So Oklahoma State, Kansas State, number 9, Oklahoma State, number 22, Kansas State. Kansas State, a 1.5 point favorite, the total 56. You got to think there might be some points there in that game. The way Adrian Martinez has played this year, it's a pretty good shot that Kansas State has the opportunity to upset Oklahoma State, though it really wouldn't be an upset in my book the way Oklahoma State has played defense this year. But Mike Gundy has them going. It could be a big win for Oklahoma State on the road. Kansas State, a 1.5 point favorite. In the SEC this afternoon, 7 o'clock Eastern, Kentucky visits number 3 Tennessee. Tennessee and Hendon Hooker, MVP candidate, not an MVP candidate, a Heisman Trophy candidate, played well. Tennessee has averaged nearly 48 points, 48 points in conference, 55 overall. They have just been dominating people. Will Levis, the quarterback for Kentucky, they've had some shots. They came back against Mississippi a few weeks ago to make it a close game. They are 5-2. Tennessee 7-0 on the year. We'll see the standings right now. They've got some SEC matchups here. We'll go through the rest of the conference matchups as well. Give you the big ones. Tennessee 3-0. They're a game back of Georgia in the SEC East, and Kentucky 2-2. They've only scored 86 points in conference play. They've only given up 79. That's number 2 in the conference in the SEC East. Number 2 overall in the conference as well, too, behind Georgia, who's only allowed 39 points. 39 points in 4 conference games they've allowed. Overall, they've only allowed 64 points in 7 games. So there you go. Talk about the Georgia Bulldogs right there as a top defense. So it'll be interesting to see if Ohio State and Georgia ever get together. All right, moving on. Kentucky visiting number 3, Tennessee. USC coming off 2 big wins. They lost to Utah 2 weeks ago. They had a bye week. They had their win against Oregon State a few weeks back. They're at Arizona. They're a 2-touchdown favorite at Arizona. And going into today's game, USC, their only loss to Utah. They're 4-1 in conference. Utah has the edge on them. And then Oregon at 4-0. Oregon will play Cal this afternoon in Berkeley. They're a 17-point favorite at Cal. We'll go through all the conferences individually in a bit. UCLA has Stanford tonight, 3-1 in conference play. Stanford 1-4 after their win last week. And then Stanford and UCLA, we talked about the big game in Michigan, the rivalry game, Michigan State and number 4 Michigan. A huge game, a huge rivalry game. 22.5 point favorite is Michigan. That's a lot of points for a rivalry game. You got to think that Michigan is on a roll right now. They certainly have. They certainly have scored a lot of points. They've blown out their teams the last few weeks. They beat up on Penn State 41-17. They had a bye week last week. In fact, Jim Harbaugh was out here in the Bay Area. He was at the 49ers game last week. I'm sure he was doing some recruiting as well, too. 24-point victory over Penn State, 21-point victory over Indiana, they messed around with, 13-point victory over Iowa, Michigan 34-27 over Maryland. That was their close game, and then every other game was a blowout from there. Michigan State, meanwhile, 3-4 overall. They beat up on Wisconsin, 7-point underdog. They got an overtime win, gave up 28 points. They got blown out by Ohio State, 49-20. They lost at Maryland. They got blown out at home by Minnesota, and then Washington beat them in a big game early in the year when they were number 11 in the country. So Michigan State has not lived up to expectations in terms of their play this year. They're 3-4 in their 7 games this year. All right, let's go individually. Individually, conference-wise, here we go. We will get to it. The ACC schedule this morning, Notre Dame, Syracuse, we talked about. Boston College and UConn. Boston College, an 8-point favorite. Florida State and Georgia Tech. Florida State, 23.5 over Georgia Tech, who has no offense this year. Florida State seems to have turned the corner a little bit. Those are noon Eastern games, 9 o'clock. Miami, Virginia. Miami, a 3-point favorite at Virginia. I don't know. Virginia's got a pretty good defense, and Miami very shaky this year. I'm not sure the favorite is the right team there in Miami over Virginia. Wake Forest and Louisville. Wake Forest, a 3-point favorite. They are number 10 in the nation. Louisville has had some good offensive production this year. Defensively, they're not very good. Wake Forest 6-1, Louisville 4-3. A big game tonight in the ACC North features Pitt and North Carolina. North Carolina leading the Coastal Conference 3-0. Pittsburgh 1-2 in conference play. They've only scored 76 points but given up 79. North Carolina 106 points scored, 69 given up in conference play. So only 23 points allowed in the in conference play for North Carolina. So 3-point favorite for the Tar Heels going into tonight's game. That's 8 o'clock on the ACC network. All right, we move on to the Big 12. We talked about Oklahoma State and Kansas State. Baylor and Texas Tech tonight. Texas Tech a 2-point favorite. Baylor's been off and on. On the road, they're a little off, but at home, they're on. They're a 2-point underdog going into Texas Tech tonight. That's at 7:30 Eastern. Oklahoma and Iowa State in 45 minutes. Oklahoma, 1.5-point favorite, a 1-point favorite in some places at Iowa State. Which Iowa State team is going to show up? Can they score some points? We know Oklahoma can score, but defensively, they're weak at home. They play pretty well. They actually had a home loss to Kansas State, but overall, they played well at home. On the road, they have not played well. They lost the Red River shootout. They got blown out by Texas a few weeks back. TCU, number 7 in the nation, 7-0. They've had some close games with them. They're at West Virginia. Never an easy place to play. The Mountaineers, JT Daniels, quarterback for West Virginia, the former USC transfer. TCU, a 7.5-point favorite on the road. That's pretty tough in the Big 12 to give up 7.5 points. So we'll give you our best bets later as we get through it. Maybe that's one of the games going on, the Big 12 games. So all of them, 9 a.m. West Coast time. Oklahoma State at 12:30. Baylor, Texas Tech at 4:30, all West Coast times. The Big 10, got a lot of games in the Big 10. Ohio State, Penn State, we talked about. Rutgers, Minnesota, which Minnesota team's going to show up? A little disrespect toward Rutgers, a 14-point favorite over the Scarlet Knights. Illinois, Nebraska. Shout out to my buddy Dan Lust, sports attorney in New York. Mr. Nebraska now the last few years. They've adopted him. 7.5-point favorite at Nebraska. Nebraska, we know they've had a tough year. They've got 3 wins. But Illinois 6-1 and making a move. They're 17th in the country right now. And they're a 7.5-point favorite at Nebraska. Can they score enough points? Northwestern and Iowa. Iowa 11.5-point favorite. They don't score very much. Northwestern has been awful on defense this year. They are 1-6. Not the way Pat Fitzgerald wanted them to start. It all started back in Ireland when they got beat up on Nebraska. That's their only win of the year, and ever since then, it's been downhill. Michigan State at Michigan, talked about that. That's a rivalry game. 23 points, it says here on the sheet for Michigan over Michigan State. I'm not sure I would take Michigan laying 23 points, but they can score. And if Michigan State can come out and play like they did against Wisconsin, even match them a little bit, touchdown for touchdown through 3 quarters, the fourth quarter might be Michigan's, but I'm not sure it'll be enough to cover for Michigan. All right, we move on to conference play here. From the Big Ten, we go to the MAC conference. I like the MAC conference. We're going to have midweek MAC games coming up starting this week, Tuesday night, Ball State, Kent State, Buffalo, and Ohio. But that starts week 10. Today, Toledo at Eastern Michigan. Toledo, a 5-point favorite over Eastern Michigan on the road. And then Miami, Ohio, a 9-point favorite at Akron. We'll look at the standings. Buffalo leads the East Conference in the MAC at 4-0. Toledo 3-1, leading the Western Conference. And from there, you got Ohio, Bowling Green at 3-1. The rest are 2-2. So not a lot going on in the MAC, but we know the MAC is a big conference, especially during the week for a lot of bettors that are out there. Mountain West, Colorado State, Boise State. Boise State about a 25-point favorite. Fresno State tonight, 10-point favorite against San Diego State. My San Jose State Spartans, their game was postponed last week to New Mexico State. They did not travel. The unfortunate passing of 19-year-old Cardas Wright, the running back who was killed in an auto accident last week. They get back on it. They're at home tonight. It's homecoming week at San Jose State, a 24.5-point favorite against the University of Nevada. And then late night Hawaii, for those of you that need that late night to pick up some money. Hawaii, 11.5-point underdog 2-6 against a Wyoming team that's 5-3. They're going to travel all the way to Hawaii. Midnight Eastern, midnight football on a Saturday. All right, we move on from the Mountain West. We get to the Pac-12. Oregon and Cal, a 17-point underdog. They're 3-4. They lost last week to Colorado on the road. Oregon 6-1 after their opening night loss to Georgia. They have been on a roll. Bo Nix has turned that program around. Dan Lanning, the former Georgia defensive coordinator, they've got it going. As I look at the standings right now in the Pac-12, they are leading the Pac-12 at 4-0, 6-1 overall, 183 points scored in 4 games, so it's about 45 a game to 120. They're giving up 30 a game. So typical Pac-12, very little defense. They gave up 30 points to UCLA, so that was right on the number last week, but they did cover the 7.5, 45-30 over Oregon, over UCLA last week as well. So they've got a 17-point favorite versus Cal. Cal 3-4, 1-3 in conference. They're minus 15 in point differential, 92 points in 4 games, giving up 107. Defense has been okay. Offense has shown some signs, but this could be real bad for Cal at home against Oregon. And then you look at USC at Arizona. USC coming off the tough loss at Utah. Utah went for 2, got the 2-point conversion, beat them 2 weeks ago, coming off the bye week. They're 14.5-point favorite at Arizona. USC, we know 4-1, second place in the pack behind Oregon. They're a half game back. They're 1 game back in the loss column as Oregon's only played 4 games so far. USC 4-1. They've given up 124 points in 5 conference games this year, so about 25 a game. Defensively, they've had some signs, but again, offensively, they are outstanding. Caleb Williams is coming in, taking that Lincoln Riley system and taking it up a notch from where they had it at Oklahoma as well. Arizona State, Colorado. Arizona State, tough times there, 13-point favorite at Colorado. Colorado's been awful this year. UCLA at number 12 coming off their loss at Oregon. They have Stanford at home. They're a 16.5-point favorite. They're on ESPN late night tonight, 10:30 Eastern, 16.5-point favorite. Stanford doesn't score. I can tell you right now that they don't score. 119 points in 5 conference games, but they've given up 168. UCLA, 157 points in 4 conference games, only giving up 126. Only, I say, because that's the way the Pac is this year, 30-point games. So there you have it, the Pac-12 games. We go on to the SEC before we'll hit the independents. Arkansas and Auburn, very interesting game. Both teams thought they were going to be better coming into this year. Arkansas 4-3, Auburn 3-4. Kind of surprising that Arkansas, the way they played this year, they are in fact 1-3 in conference, minus 34 in point differential, and they've gone to Auburn, who is 1-3. They've only scored 78 points in conference play, and they've given up 125 points in 4 games. So this is not a game for the weak-hearted. You can tell that Auburn and Arkansas have struggled this year, both to put up points in conference play, but they've given up points. Arkansas, a 3-point favorite, surprisingly, at Auburn. I don't know what to make of this game. I would lay off this game. They're on the SEC network in about a half an hour. Florida, Georgia, we talked about them. Georgia, more than a 3-touchdown favorite, 23-point favorite against Florida. This is a rivalry game. 3:30 CBS. Every year CBS has this game. It's a war. We'll see how when Florida comes out and plays. They got to get some stops early. Georgia's only allowed 9 points per game, both in conference and overall. Missouri, South Carolina, very interesting game with South Carolina. South Carolina, 25th in the country. 3.5-point favorite over Missouri offense that can score, but they've had their tough times. They've had their tough times on defense. They've scored 168 points in 7 games, so that's not bad. 162 they've given up, but in conference play they're only 1-3. 70 points scored in 4 games. That's not good. That's not even 20 a game. 81 given up, and they've given up just barely over 20. So maybe an underplay here for them. They've got South Carolina, whose defense is very good. They're 2-2, 91 points scored in conference, but they've given up 130, 232 overall. They're 5-2, number 25 in the nation. So 3-0 non-conference, but 174 points given up in 7 games. Defensively, they're pretty good. They've won 4 in a row. They are 2-2 in conference play, however, minus 39 point differential. That's a tough one for me. I would think that Missouri's offensive woes will keep them from scoring as well. Kentucky, Tennessee, we talked about. Herndon Hooker, Heisman candidate, 11.5-point favorite. Kentucky's defense is really good. Will Levis, one of the top quarterbacks in the draft coming out this year, 11.5 points, 5-2 for Kentucky overall. But in conference play, they are 2-2. They've scored 86 points, given up 79. In conference play, Tennessee has given up 95 in 3 conference games. So they've given up more than 30 points. So 11.5 might be something to look at as well. And the last SEC game we have is Ole Miss and Texas A&M. Ole Miss off a tough loss last week at LSU. They were a favorite. They gave up 45 points to Brian Kelly's LSU team, who does not score at all. Lane Kiffin trying to work his magic at Mississippi. They're 3-1. They're a game back. They're actually tied for the lead with Alabama and LSU in conference play, though Alabama and LSU have 4 wins apiece. Mississippi, 142 points scored, 126 given up. But the non-conference play, 306, scored 166 given up. So they played pretty well in the non-conference games, but in the conference games, they've struggled a little bit. And certainly the loss to LSU doesn't help their cause. They've got the Texas A&M Aggies, Jimbo Fisher, in a little bit of controversy. He didn't even show up to media day this week for preparation for their game. And that's not a good look. And the SEC Network called him out on it. A couple of guys from Fox called him out on it. Texas A&M 1-3, 91 points scored, 117 given up. They had that great game, almost comeback against Alabama 3 weeks ago. But they haven't been good this year. Jimbo Fisher's year might not make the season. He might finish the season, but he might not be there after this year. There was too much money that they gave him, the Aggies gave him. So he might be there for a long time, and hopefully they can turn it around. They are a 3-point underdog at home on the SEC Network tonight, 7:30 Eastern. Ole Miss 15th in the country after losing to LSU last week on the road. All right, we move on to the independents here. The independents, we'll look at the independents. Where are we at here? Notre Dame, here we are. Yes, independents. Notre Dame and Syracuse, we talked about, they're still an independent. Boston College faces UConn, New Mexico State, and UMass, the 3 independents. BYU, a 3-point favorite against East Carolina last night. East Carolina went in there and beat them in Provo, 27-24, as East Carolina not only covers the 3, they win the game outright as the field goal at the buzzer wins it by Andrew Conrad, 33-yard field goal. So there you have your independents as well. Notre Dame and Syracuse, the line has come down to even. Syracuse at 1.5 points. Hopefully you got it at 1.5 when I mentioned it. Boston College -7.5 and UMass -1.5. All right, when we come back, I'll give you our best bets for Saturday, as well as talk a little bit about the NBA, and then we will wrap it up with Game 2 preview of the World Series. Back in 30 seconds. This is the V Party Sports Podcast, sponsored by the Brit Sports Pub and Patio in downtown San Jose. Come back with us in 30 seconds. We'll talk a little more college football, best bets segment, which everybody's waiting for. Kickoffs in about a half hour for the NCAA, and then a little more NBA to go into. Back in 30 seconds. Welcome back to the V Party Sports Podcast. Vasu VParty here. You can reach me on Twitter at VPartySports, on Instagram, VPartySports, on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, Vasu VParty. You just look me up there as well. Thanks to everybody on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter for joining us. Got some people on here that I see that are checking us out before college football starts in a half hour here, noon on the East Coast, 9 a.m. on the West Coast. We talk about the NCAA football. We gave you our best bets early for the early games. Ohio State and Notre Dame. Ohio State laying 15.5. Notre Dame getting 1.5 against Syracuse. All right, here are the best bets for Saturday. Ohio State, told you 15.5 at Penn State. A lot to give up, but Ohio State's offense is terrific. And Penn State has a tough time scoring. They showed it 2 weeks ago against Michigan. They did take apart a pretty good Minnesota team. but Minnesota is nowhere near what Ohio State is in the Big Ten. Notre Dame plus 1.5 versus Syracuse. Even at the Carrier Dome, Syracuse has had close games the whole year. In fact, they've had to come back a couple of times, but Notre Dame plus 1.5. All right, the rest of college football, and then we'll get to the NBA, and we'll give you some best bets in the NBA as well, too. I did give you the World Series pick. We'll go through that again before we close out here in the next 9 minutes or so you can get all your action in before the noontime starts on the East Coast, 9 a.m. on the West Coast. Pretty early here. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter. Thanks to the Brit Sports Pub and Patio, 10% off your entire bill during NFL Sunday Ticket. If you mention the podcast, we'll be there live tomorrow, 12:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific online, 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 Pacific, live from the Brit Sports Pub and Patio. Come on down, mention the podcast, 10% off your entire bill. That includes alcohol as well, too. All right, what you've been waiting for, best bets for Saturday. Here we go. I already gave you Ohio State, Notre Dame. UCF, they've got Cincinnati. Cincinnati ranked this year. As I look at the rankings, Cincinnati is ranked. Let me get these rankings out here, 12:30. Cincinnati's ranked 20th in the country. They are on the road at UCF, 6-1 in conference play. UCF 6-1 overall, 5-2 for UCF. This is a big game. This will determine first place in the Conference USA. In the Conference USA, Cincinnati, a 1.5-point underdog. Don't take it. Even though they're ranked, I'm telling you, UCF, Central Florida, has some affiliation to them, but there's no bias here for me on that. But Cincinnati will lose today. UCF about a 60 percentage points by ESPN, a 1.5-point favorite. They're going to take on Cincinnati. They're going to beat Cincinnati today as they are going to play at 12:30 on ESPN Pacific time. UCF minus 1.5. Those Cal Bears, they're going to be in Berkeley. They're at home. They've got Oregon coming in. Oregon on a roll. They lost to Georgia to open the year. 17-point favorite. I don't think that's going to be enough for Cal offense, who can't score. Cal defense is going to be a rough time for Cal today. Oregon laying 17 at Cal in a blowout. Bo Nix has been outstanding. They beat up on UCLA, a ranked team last week. Oregon minus 17. Kansas State 1.5 over Oklahoma State at home. Oklahoma State number 9 in the country. Kansas State playing well. Adrian Martinez, the transfer from Nebraska, he's been really good. They are 22 in the country, and they're at home. 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. A 1.5-point favorite over Oklahoma State. Georgia 23.5 points. We said they've only given up 9.5 points on defense. They are playing Florida. 23.5-point favorite. Take the Dogs. I know it's a rivalry game, Florida. This is a neutral site game in Jacksonville. 23.5-point favorite. Tennessee, 11.5-point favorite versus Kentucky. I am going to go with them. It's going to be a tough game. 11.5 over Kentucky. Will Levis, the quarterback, their defense is pretty good, but I just can't see anybody stopping the Tennessee offense right now. It's going to be a big game. They do give up 30 points a game in conference, so that's going to be the only question mark. But they're 7-0, number 3 in the country, and they have a shot at running the table. They beat Alabama this year. They have a shot at running the table. I have to see their schedule. Let me look at their schedule and see. They've got Georgia in next week, so that's going to be their test right there to see if they can run the table. They are going to Georgia, already a 13.5-point underdog against Georgia. So those are your games for your best bets. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Central Florida, Oregon, Kansas State, Georgia, and Tennessee. 1 underdog and 6 favorites and 1 underdog. 6 favorites and 1 underdog in NCAA play. All right, when we come back, we will wrap it up with the NBA, talk a little bit about the NBA, give you our best bets in the NBA, as well as talk a little World Series. Back in 30 seconds, the VPartySports Podcast brought to you by the Brit Sports Pub and Patio, downtown San Jose. Check them out for your NCAA NFL viewing. Come see us tomorrow live, 9:30 Pacific time. Get 10% off your bill, your entire bill, every Sunday for the next 5 Sundays during NFL Sunday Ticket hours. Back in 30 seconds. I'm Vasi Vadaparty. This is the VParty Sports Podcast. Welcome back to the VParty Sports Podcast. I'm Vasu Vadaparty. Gave you our best bet segment for college football. College football going to start in 15 minutes. A few games going on, but right now we'll talk about the NBA. Download on Facebook and YouTube, Twitter, anytime. If you missed the best bet segment, which I know most of you are interested in, check it out. Let's get to the NBA here a little bit. Wild night in the NBA. We've got the Lakers, who are 0-5. That hurts to say that, being a Lakers fan. 0-5 after losing the T-Wolves last night. Didn't even cover. Minnesota's pretty good. They've got the Twin Towers with Gobert, 22 points, 21 rebounds for him. The Wizards, they end up losing to the Pacers last night. 5.5-point favorite to the Pacers. The Wizards lose on the road. They lose 127-117. The Lakers score was 111-102 to the Timberwolves last night. Some of the other scores, the Hawks improved to 4-1, 136-112 at Detroit. They covered. The Magic got their first win, 113-93 over the Hornets as well. Philadelphia gets off the snide. They're a 2.5-point underdog. They beat Toronto in Toronto, 112-90. The Bucks continue to roll. They're 4-0, 119-108 over the Knicks. DeMar DeRozan hit the 20,000-point mark. He did it against his former team, the San Antonio Spurs, but they lose 129-124 in San Antonio. The Nuggets continue to roll, 117-101 over the Utah Jazz, who are surprising 4-2. The Trailblazers, no Dame Lillard, 125-111 over the Houston Rockets. That was one of our plays yesterday, was the over, 222, and it went way over. And the Suns down big to the Pelicans. They improved their record, 124-111 over the New Orleans Pelicans. Phoenix now 4-1. Give you a couple of standings notes here. Milwaukee, the only undefeated team left in the NBA this year. They're 4-0. A couple of teams of 4-1 with Atlanta and Cleveland. And then a bunch of 2-loss teams, and then 3-loss teams. And then Orlando and Detroit, Brooklyn bring up the rear. Brooklyn 1-4. How about all those championship aspirations? They can't play defense. That's their biggest problem right now. They're 1-4. They play today. In the Western Conference, the Portland Trailblazers are 5-1. They lead the entire Western Conference. They're going to be without Dame Lillard for a while, as we said. Phoenix and Memphis are both 4-1. Utah 4-2. Denver 4-2. San Antonio, Minnesota 4-2. Warriors 3-2. Had a couple of tough games, but they've got Charlotte today. New Orleans 3-2. Dallas at 2-2. Oklahoma City, the Clippers 2-3. Tough start for the Clippers. So far, they're resting George and Leonard to start. Houston 1-5. They got beat up by Portland, as we said. Sacramento and the Lakers yet to find their first win. Sacramento, a tough game against Memphis the other night. All right, NBA notes for today. We'll give you the NBA scores for Saturday. Some big games going on today. The Hawks are 4-1. We said the only undefeated team left in the NBA is the Milwaukee Bucks. They play each other. They're going to be going at 8 o'clock Eastern. Milwaukee about a 5.5-point favorite or 5-point favorite against the Atlanta Hawks. Defensively, Milwaukee's played pretty well. They had their tough game against Brooklyn on Wednesday where they were down big, but they came back and ended up winning that game as well. The surprising Jazz host Memphis. Talked about Memphis at 4-1. The Jazz a 2.5-point underdog. The Nets are only 1-4. They host the Pacers, but they're a 10-point or 11-point favorite, depending on where you are on the scale. Last night, the NBA favorites, we try and give you this every day. The NBA favorites were 6-5. The over was seven times over, 4 times under in the 11 games that we have for the total players that we have out there, the overs and unders. All right, best bets in the NBA tonight. I got to stick with the Milwaukee Bucks until they lose. 5-point favorite. The Hawks have given up a lot of points. Milwaukee's defense has been good. Giannis has played well. Brook Lopez has played well. They don't even have Middleton ready to go yet. As I look at the injury report tonight for the Bucks and the Hawks, Bogdanovich is out for the Hawks. No injured players for the Milwaukee Bucks. The full injury report. Check out the full injury report. The game's at 8 o'clock Eastern from Milwaukee, 7 o'clock Central Time. The Bucks -5. Then those Utah Jazz and Memphis Grizzlies, they score a lot of points to the Utah Jazz. They have so far in their 6 games. Memphis has played 5 games, so 4-1. I like the over in this game, 226.5. Seems like a lot, but the way the NBA is going, the fact the overs are coming in more than they are, over 226 in that game between Utah and Memphis. The Bucks -5, Utah Memphis over 226.5. We're getting close to kickoff. One last selection. We talked about the World Series. What a game by the Phillies last night. Come back from 5-0 down. JT Realmuto, the hero, the game-tying double in the fifth inning after Philadelphia had scored 3 off Verlander, after Justin Verlander had gone perfect for 3 innings, 9 up and 9 down. Philly got to him for 3 in the fourth. The Alec Boehm double, the 2-run double to make it 5-3. Castellanos with 2 outs got the big single to make it 5-1. Looked like it was going to be Houston. Kyle Tucker, my pick to click. 2 home runs, 4 RBIs for the Astros. Game 2 tonight. I can't see Houston losing 2 games at home. This is game 2. Houston, 138. Framber Valdez, been their best pitcher all year. Verlander been hurt, even though Verlander looks like he's going to get the Cy Young. But Framber Valdez has 17 wins of himself. Dave Sims and Marty Lurie previewed the World Series with me yesterday. Dave Sims talked about how good Framber Valdez was. He ought to know the Seattle Mariners, who he broadcast for, they saw them 19 times in the regular season and saw them 3 times in the playoffs where they got swept. So Framber Valdez, Zach Wheeler got an extra day of rest coming off the injury he had during the year. Aaron Nola, with the Phillies coming back to tie them up last night at 5, tie the Astros up at 5, it allowed Aaron Nola to stay in the game and preserve the bullpen. So the bullpen is fresh. Rob Thompson, the now newly named manager, signed him for 2 years. No more interim tag for him. Has his whole bullpen available tonight. So if they get into a situation where they win, don't be surprised if he goes to the 8th and 9th inning guys in the 6th and 7th inning with Alvarado and Eflin and Dominguez and everybody like that from there. But I just don't see Houston losing 2 games in a row. Jose Altuve's got to get off the snide. He's only got 3 hits this entire postseason. Tucker hit the 2 home runs. Bregman's been hitting the ball okay. And Alvarez has struggled since the LDS versus Seattle. But I'm going with Houston tonight, 138, the favorite. The total 7. Those 2 ballparks are small. See some runs scored. Don't know if that'll be the case, but that's a tough number to get at 7. All right. Want to thank everybody on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter for joining me today for the NCAA preview, the NBA preview, the World Series preview, the NCAA, MLB, NCAA, NBA preview show, the VPartySports Podcast. I'm Vasu Vadaparty. Join me live tomorrow, 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. Pacific at the Brit Sports Pub and Patio. We will be there doing a live show, 10% off your bill during the Sunday ticket if you mention the podcast. Also, go in there and check them out during the week for happy hour. Go in there and check them out for music. Go in there and check them out today for NCAA football as well, too. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks to everybody on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. I'm Vasu Vadaparty. That's the VPartySports Podcast for today. Have a great day. Good luck with all your games. And we'll see you tomorrow, 9:30 Pacific time, from the Brit, Downtown Sports Pub and Patio. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.